We moved into a beautiful Victorian house we could finally afford. But the house has been empty for 25 years, and the first time we heard footsteps coming from the attic, we realized we may not be the only ones living there. There are some houses that look abandoned. Then there are houses that look as if they are waiting. When I first saw Whispering Pines, I thought it was the first kind. I was wrong. My name is Rajiv Kapoor. I was 25 when I moved to the United States for a job at Northgate Solutions. Like most people who leave everything familiar behind for a better opportunity, I arrived with 2 suitcases, a laptop, and the naive belief that the hardest part of starting a new life would be finding my place in a new country. I had no idea that finding a place to live would nearly cost me my life. And I certainly never imagined that the house I eventually called home had been empty for 25 years for a reason. It began with 4 of us. Lucia Fernandez Garcia was 24, from Spain, and worked in marketing. Tabo Makono was 22, from South Africa, and worked in accounting. Emma McDonald was 22, from Canada, and worked in human resources. And then there was me. 4 immigrants, 4 strangers who had ended up at the same company, in the same city, trying to build new lives thousands of miles away from home. At first, we barely knew each other. That changed when we realized we had the same problem. None of us could afford decent accommodation. The apartments close to the office were ridiculously expensive. The cheaper places were either miles away, in bad neighborhoods, or in such poor condition that we were better off staying in corporate housing. Unfortunately, corporate housing was temporary. We only had 2 weeks left. That was when my colleague Everett came up with what seemed like a perfect solution. Instead of 4 people struggling individually, why not rent one house together? It made financial sense. 4 salaries, 1 rent, 4 bedrooms, and, most importantly, a decent neighborhood. Everett knew a realtor named Lizzie Sutton. We contacted Lizzie, and she sent us the details of a property. The price was almost suspiciously low, but at that point, none of us cared. We just wanted a place to live. So on a cloudy Saturday afternoon, the 4 of us drove out to see it. That was the first time I saw the house. The first thing I noticed was the name. A wooden plaque hung beside the front door. Whispering Pines. The letters were faded, but still readable. The house itself was beautiful in a neglected sort of way. It was an old Victorian-style property with dark wooden siding, tall windows, a wide porch, and a chimney rising above the roof. But there was something wrong with it. It looked untouched. The grass around the house had been cut, but the place still had the appearance of somewhere nobody had lived for a very long time. There were no children's toys, no flower pots, no cars in the driveway, no signs of ordinary life. Lizzie arrived a few minutes later. She greeted us with a smile and apologized for being late. Then she reached into her handbag. What she pulled out was an old-fashioned key. It was long, dark, and looked as though it belonged in another century. She unlocked the front door. The moment it opened, a cold breeze brushed past us. It was strange because the afternoon was warm. But what really bothered me was Lizzie. She didn't walk inside. She just stood at the doorway. She looked into the house, then glanced toward the upstairs windows. There was something in her expression. Nervousness. Not the kind of nervousness you see when someone is trying to sell a property. It looked more like she was afraid of what might be waiting inside. I noticed her watching the staircase. When she caught me looking at her, she immediately smiled. It was an unusually bright smile, the kind people use when they are trying very hard to hide something. I asked her about the history of the house. She told us it had been built in the 70s. A family of 6 had lived there, but they had eventually moved away, and the house had been vacant for around 25 years. 25 years. That number stayed with me, because the house didn't look like it had been empty for 25 years. It looked like somebody had simply walked out one evening and never returned. Still, the inside was stunning. The ground floor had a large living room with an old fireplace, a kitchen connected to the dining area, and a master bedroom with its own bathroom. Upstairs were 3 bedrooms. 2 had attached bathrooms. The third shared a bathroom in the hallway. And at the end of another narrow staircase was an attic. The attic door was old and dark. I remember looking at it for several seconds. I don't know why. Something about that door made me uncomfortable. But the others loved the house. Lucia loved the Victorian design. Emma liked the bedrooms. Tabo was already calculating how much money we would save. And honestly, I liked it too. The rent was affordable. The neighborhood looked safe. And we were running out of options. So we agreed. We would take it. We told Lizzie our decision. She smiled. But I noticed the anxiety return to her eyes. When we walked outside, something happened that none of us could explain. A strong gust of wind suddenly came through the open front door. It rushed past us. Emma's hair flew across her face. She turned around. The strange part was that there wasn't any wind outside. The trees weren't moving. The air was completely still. But the curtains inside the house were gently swaying. Emma stared at the doorway for several seconds. Then she laughed nervously and said something about the house having terrible insulation. We laughed with her. And that was it. At least that's what we thought. 2 weeks later, we moved in. Everett helped us carry furniture. Most of what we owned came from thrift stores, yard sales, and secondhand shops. By sunset, the house finally looked occupied. Boxes were everywhere. The kitchen was full of groceries. The living room had a couch. There were lamps in the bedrooms. Our clothes were hanging in closets. For the first time in decades, Whispering Pines looked like someone's home again. But the neighborhood didn't seem happy about it. I remember Lucia standing by the living room window while Everett was carrying a box inside. She noticed an elderly couple walking past the house. They stopped when they reached our gate. The old man stared at the house. The woman whispered something to him. Then both of them looked directly toward the window, toward Lucia. They quickly walked away. Lucia joked that she was disappointed nobody had brought us a pie. We laughed. Then she noticed something else. The neighbors weren't smiling. The woman in the house next door was standing in her front yard. The man across the street was doing the same. Both were looking at the house. Neither looked curious. They looked worried. We ignored it. People can be strange. We didn't know yet that some of those people had been waiting 25 years for somebody to make the mistake we had just made. The first month passed quietly. Work kept us busy. We learned each other's habits. We argued over dishes. We complained about the internet. We fought over who had forgotten to buy milk. Normal things. For a while, Whispering Pines was simply our house. Then one evening, everything changed. It was around 7 at night. The four of us had gone grocery shopping because we decided to cook a proper dinner. We came home laughing and carrying bags. Lucia unlocked the front door. We stepped into the foyer, and all four of us stopped. A blast of freezing air hit us. Not cool air. Freezing. It swept through the entrance and wrapped around us like someone had opened a door to winter. I could see my own breath. It was summer. Nobody said anything. Then we heard footsteps. Above us. Heavy footsteps. Slow. One step. Then another. They were coming from the direction of the attic. Lucia dropped one of the grocery bags. Emma grabbed her arm. Tabo stared toward the ceiling. The footsteps continued. 1, 2, 3. Then silence. We ran. I don't remember deciding to run. I simply remember being outside. All four of us were standing in the front yard. Lucia and Emma were terrified. Tabo kept looking at the windows. I tried to convince myself that there was a logical explanation. Someone had broken in. Maybe a squatter. Maybe an animal. Maybe someone had been hiding upstairs. We needed help. I remembered Lizzie mentioning that a police officer had recently moved into the neighborhood. The girls ran to his house. Tabo and I stayed back in case the intruder came out. A few minutes later, they returned with him. He was off duty, but he had brought his weapon. He told us to stay outside. Then he entered the house alone. I watched him disappear through the front door. He announced himself loudly. No response. He checked the living room, the kitchen, the downstairs bedroom. Then he climbed the stairs. 1 bedroom. Nothing. 2nd bedroom. Nothing. 3rd bedroom. Nothing. The attic remained. He climbed the smaller staircase. I could see him standing outside the door. He tried the handle. It wouldn't move. He tried again. Nothing. Then he stepped back and slammed his shoulder into it. The door burst open. Darkness. The officer reached for the light. It flickered, then came on. The attic was empty. Only old cardboard boxes covered the floor. He searched behind them. Nothing. He relaxed. His gun lowered. He switched off the light. And then he saw it. A figure standing in the corner. A human silhouette. Tall. Still. Watching him. He immediately switched the light back on. Nothing. Just an empty corner. He switched it off again. Nothing. The officer stood there for several seconds. Then he walked downstairs. He told us there was nobody in the house. He suggested it might have been an animal, or the sound of an old house settling. We accepted that explanation because we desperately wanted to. But as the officer walked back toward his house, he kept looking over his shoulder. He had seen something. I know that now, and I think he knew exactly what it was. A few weeks later, I woke up at around 2 in the morning. The television was on. The volume was low at first. Then it became louder and louder. I was irritated. I assumed one of the others had fallen asleep watching television. I walked out of my room. The living room was dark. Nobody was there. Only the television illuminated the room. I checked the kitchen. Empty. I switched off the television. Then I went back to bed. The next morning, I asked everyone if they had left the television on. Nobody had. That was the first time something happened inside the house that had no reasonable explanation. But it wasn't the last. One evening, Emma came downstairs furious. She accused Tabo and me of going through her clothes. Her undergarments had been pulled from her drawer and thrown across the bedroom floor. We stared at her in shock. We both protested, saying we did not enter her room. Lucia backed us up. She had been with us downstairs. Neither Tabo nor I had gone upstairs. But Emma didn't believe us. She stormed back to her room. As Tabo, Lucia, and I looked at each other in disbelief, we heard Emma scream. We ran upstairs. Her bedroom door wouldn't open. I pushed it. Nothing. I pushed harder. It wouldn't budge. It felt as if someone was holding the other side. I put my shoulder against it, and the door suddenly opened. There was nothing behind it. Emma was sitting on the floor near the bathroom door. Lucia ran to her and held her. Emma was crying. Her eyes were wide with terror. She pointed toward the other side of the room, beyond where Tabo and I were standing. She said there was someone standing behind the door. Tabo opened it. Nothing. Only Emma's jacket hanging behind it. We tried to convince her that she had mistaken the jacket for a shadow of a person. But I remember looking at the jacket. There was something about it. The way it hung. The way the room suddenly felt colder. I didn't say anything. Neither did Tabo. A few days later, Lucia complained about a burning sensation across her back. Emma checked and she gasped, putting her hand to her mouth. I stood and checked. My eyes widened in shock. 3 long scratches ran across Lucia's shoulder blades. They weren't deep enough to be dangerous, but there was blood, and the skin around them was inflamed. Lucia hadn't felt herself being scratched. She hadn't scratched herself. She said she had noticed the pain while taking a shower. None of us knew what to say. Another night, we were all gathered in the living room, watching television. I was sitting in an armchair. Emma and Lucia were on the couch. Tabo was on a beanbag. The television was playing quietly. Then I heard it. Click. I looked around. A few seconds later, I heard it again. Click. Click. At first, nobody else noticed. Then I noticed Lucia's eyes knit together in confusion. She heard it too. She muted the television. The room went silent, and the sound was unmistakable. Click. 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 We turned toward the dining area. An old rocking chair was moving. It had been damaged when we'd moved in. One side was cracked. The chair was unsafe, so we'd left it there as decoration. But it was now rocking by itself. Backwards. Forwards. Backwards. Forwards. The clicking came from the damaged wood rubbing against itself. The same clicking it would make only if someone were sitting in it. But nobody was sitting there. The chair continued rocking. Faster. Then faster. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. I remember thinking that the room suddenly felt occupied. Not by us, but by someone else. Someone we couldn't see. And then the chair stopped. For 1 second, everything was still. Then the chair slowly turned toward us. The 4 of us froze. Emma began crying. Lucia grabbed her. Tabo started praying under his breath. And I stared at the empty chair. Because at that moment, I knew. We weren't alone. There was something inside that house. Something that knew we were there. After that night, the incidents became more frequent. We heard phantom footsteps, doors opening on their own, whispers in another rooms. We even heard faint laughter of children. Sometimes even sounds of crying, objects moving. Not a lot, but enough to make you question your sanity. Sometimes we heard something that sounded like a growl coming from inside the walls. Nobody wanted to be alone anymore. If one person had to stay late at work, the others waited. If someone needed to go somewhere, we went together. The house had stopped feeling like home. It felt like territory, and whatever lived there considered us intruders. One evening, I was sick and stayed home from work. The others were still at the office. I was making soup in the kitchen. The house became quiet, too quiet. While I waited for the water to boil, I suddenly felt like someone was standing behind me. I turned. Nothing. I looked back toward the stove. Then I noticed something in the glass cabinet. A reflection. 4 figures. Standing between the kitchen and the living room. Children. 4 of them. 2 older. 2 younger. Their skin looked gray. Their faces were pale. Their eyes were completely black. I couldn't breathe. I turned around. Nothing. I looked back at the cabinet. Nothing. I told myself I was sick. Maybe it was the medication. Maybe it was exhaustion. Anything I could think of. Then I saw her. In the reflection, a woman's face. Pale. Expressionless. Blood dripping from the side of her head. She was standing directly behind me. I spun around. Nothing. I nearly fell, but I managed to grab the edge of the kitchen counter. I stood there trembling, trying to convince myself that my fever was making me hallucinate. About an hour later, the others came home. They found me sitting at the dining table. I was staring into the kitchen. Lucia touched my forehead. I could barely hear her asking whether I had taken my medicine. Then I asked them a question. Have any of you felt, seen, or heard anything strange in the house? They went silent. That silence told me everything. Tabo finally admitted that things in the upstairs bathroom moved by themselves. Emma said she sometimes woke up and saw a shadow standing at the foot of her bed. Lucia rolled up her sleeve. There were bruises on her arm. She said she often woke up with bruises she couldn't explain. I told them about the children. Nobody laughed. Nobody called it a hallucination, because we had all seen something. We just hadn't been ready to admit it. One Sunday, we were cleaning the house. Lucia and Emma were in the kitchen. Tabo and I were vacuuming the living room. The elderly neighbor next door appeared at her kitchen window. She was staring directly at us. Lucia smiled and waved. Emma waved too, but the woman didn't respond. She simply stared for a moment. Then she walked away. Seconds later, we heard footsteps above us. 3 heavy footsteps. From the attic. Then came a loud crash. We stopped. I looked at Tabo. He looked at me. Neither of us wanted to go upstairs. But we finally did. The attic door opened with a long creak. The light flickered. A cardboard box had fallen over. Inside it were 3 things. A framed photograph, an old book, and an amulet. The amulet was unlike anything I'd ever seen. It had a strange symbols carved into it. One symbol made me uncomfortable just looking at it. Tabo picked up the photograph. I took it from him and turned it over. I almost dropped it. It showed a family, a mother, a father, 4 children, 2 boys, 2 girls, and I recognized them. They were the children I'd seen reflected in the kitchen cabinet. The mother looked young, beautiful. She had a warm smile. Her face looked familiar. And then I remembered. It was the same face that I saw along with the children, with blood dripping from her head. The father's face was damaged, burned, or deliberately scratched from the photograph. We took the photograph, the book, and the amulet downstairs. The 4 of us stared at them on the dining table. For the first time, we knew we weren't imagining things. We were dealing with something that had happened in this house before. Something terrible. A few nights later, I woke up because someone touched my face. I opened my eyes. The same 4 children were standing beside the window, their black eyes on me. The youngest, a little girl, looked directly at me. And she spoke. "Help us." I sat upright. The room was empty, silent. The next morning I told the others. They stared at me in terrified silence. Then Emma noticed something on Lucia's neck. Bruises. These looked fresh. and they looked like fingerprints, like someone had wrapped their hands around her throat. Lucia told us that she hadn't felt anything. That was when I told them we had to find out what happened here. We searched online, and it didn't take long. The first article we found was dated 25 years earlier. The headline made my stomach turn: "A Family Massacre at Whispering Pines." The article described a father who had killed his wife and all his children during what police believed was a ritualistic attack. The eldest son, 15 years old, had fought back. He had killed his father to protect his youngest sister. But by then, the little girl was already dead, and he too died before the police could arrive. The article also mentioned abuse. The eldest daughter had suffered repeated injuries around her neck. Lucia slowly touched her own bruised throat. None of us spoke. When Emma saw the photograph of the father, she immediately recognized him. She said he was the same figure she had seen standing in her bedroom. We kept reading. The mother had been killed first. She was struck on her head by a blunt object. The 4 children were next. The father had been found dead with a stab wound to his neck. The eldest son had died with a knife in his hands. Then we reached the part that shocked us most. The police had taken a statement from a neighbor. The neighbor who had witnessed the father's violent behavior. The neighbor who had called the police that night. The neighbor whose photo appeared at the bottom of the article. The photo was 25 years old, but we recognized her instantly. It was the woman next door. We all looked at each other. Then we decided to go to her house to get more answers. I knocked nervously, looking back at the others. I didn't know what to say. She opened the door. The moment she saw us, she slammed it shut. We stood there. We begged her to talk to us. We told her what had been happening. We told her we couldn't sleep, that we were afraid to stay alone, that it was affecting our work. For several seconds, there was nothing. We were about to leave when the door opened. The old woman looked at all 4 of us. She sighed and stepped aside. She invited us in. Her story explained everything. 25 years earlier, the father had lost his job. He started drinking. Then the drinking turned into violence. He abused his wife. He abused his children. The neighbor had warned the mother to go to the police, but the father found out. He threatened the neighbor. She decided not to interfere. Then one day he suddenly stopped drinking. At first, everyone thought he had changed, but he hadn't. He had joined a cult. The members followed strange rituals. The leaders taught delusional teachings, and every member wore strange amulets, the same kind we had found in our attic. According to the old woman, the leaders convinced its members that the world was approaching an apocalypse. They believed their families had to be sacrificed to appease the gods. The father became obsessed. One rainy night, it was the night of the new moon, he came home carrying a strange book and an axe. He was chanting in a strange language. His expression was strange and dangerous. His family tried to lock him out, but he managed to break the door using the axe. His family tried to escape. He chased them through the house. The neighbor called the police hearing the screams. But the storm had knocked a tree across the road. The police were delayed. By the time they arrived, it was over. The mother was dead, hit on the side of the head with the blunt side of the axe. 3 children were struck with the same axe during the attack. The eldest son had fought back. He stabbed his father in the neck, but he couldn't save his siblings. A few seconds later, he too died. When the police entered the house, they found the family scattered throughout the rooms. It was the most brutal scene of the century, according to the police statements. It was a crime that shocked the county, a crime that has been talked about ever since. Then the old woman told us something else. We weren't the first people to rent Whispering Pines after the murders. 3 other families had moved in. All 3 had left within months. They all reported strange incidents happening all over the house, which then later turned dangerous. We were stunned. Our realtor had told us the original family simply moved away. She had never mentioned the murders. She had never mentioned the other tenants. We thanked the old woman and left. That night, we searched for answers. We found stories on forums, people describing similar experiences and what they did to fight back. Most suggestions were ridiculous, but some weren't. One suggestion appeared repeatedly: have the house blessed. The next morning, we went to a local church. We spoke with the priest. He listened to everything. He didn't laugh. He didn't tell us we were imagining things. He simply asked one question: "Do you still have anything that belonged to the family?" I told him about the amulet. His expression changed. He agreed to come to the house 3 days later, on the night of the new moon. 3 days later, at 9 o'clock, the priest arrived. The moment he entered the house, the atmosphere changed. It became cold, ominous. He began blessing the rooms one by one with holy water. We followed him. At first, nothing happened. Then the lights flickered. Once, twice, then violently, as the priest continued to pray and bless. A picture fell from the wall. Then a cabinet door swung open and slammed shut. Something struck the kitchen counter. But the priest continued. Then suddenly, the Bible in his hand was suddenly yanked downward. As if something was trying to stop him from continuing, he nearly dropped it. That was when he stopped. He looked toward the attic. Then he told us something that I will never forget. Whatever was haunting the house wasn't going to leave willingly. He believed the Father Spirit was attached to something connected to him. Something important, something he had carried, something he had used. And we needed to destroy it. And I remembered it. The amulet. I ran upstairs. I was almost pulled back by something invisible. But I managed to go on. As I rushed upstairs, Lucia, Tabo, and Emma began to start a fire in the fireplace. I brought the amulet down. The fire had now started to grow bigger. The priest stood beside us, guiding us. We threw the amulet into the flames. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then the house erupted. The lights flickered violently. The walls seemed to tremble. The cabinets shook. The fireplace roared. Something crashed upstairs. Emma screamed. Lucia grabbed my arm. Tabo started praying. The priest kept praying and spraying holy water. Then suddenly, everything stopped. The lights became steady. The house became silent. Not the unnatural silence we had become used to. This was different. Peaceful. For the first time since moving in, I could breathe without feeling watched. Then, I swear, I saw the images of the children and the mother on the staircase. It was just for a few seconds. The youngest mouthed the words, "Thank you," and they just vanished. We all looked at each other. I asked the others if they saw it. They just shook their heads. Even today, I wonder if what I saw was real or just my mind trying to make me feel better. We stayed there for another few months. Nothing happened. No footsteps. No voices. No scratches. No shadows. Eventually, we each found new places to live. We never returned to Whispering Pines. The four of us still work at Northgate Solutions. We still meet every couple of weeks. We talk about everything: work, money, relationships, life. But we rarely talk about that house, because none of us really knows what happened there. Maybe the amulet was connected to the Father. Maybe destroying it broke whatever hold he had on the house. Maybe there was something psychological happening to all four of us. Maybe the combination of fear, exhaustion, and the history of the property caused us to see things that weren't there. I've considered every explanation. I want to believe in the rational ones. I really do. But there is one thing I can't explain. Something that happened months after we left. I was cleaning out my bag one night. I found the photograph we had taken of the family in the attic. I had forgotten that I still had it. I pulled it out. The mother, the four children, the damaged face of the father. I stared at the photograph for a long time. Then I noticed something I missed the first time. There was someone standing behind the family. At first, I thought it was a shadow. I looked closer. It wasn't. It was a man, tall. His face was pale. His eyes were completely black. And he was standing directly behind the father. I turned the photograph over, and then I turned it back up. He was still there. I wanted to throw the photograph away, but I decided to hide it away from our world. I haven't opened that photograph since. But sometimes, when I am alone at night, I hear something. A faint clicking sound. Slow, rhythmic, like the wooden legs of an old rocking chair moving across a floor. Click, click, click. And every time I hear it, I remember the name on that old wooden plaque, Whispering Pines, because I finally understand what that name meant. The house wasn't named for the sound of the trees. It was named for what lived inside. And some houses don't stop whispering just because you leave them behind. In the end, a question always lingered at the back of my mind. Were we substitutes for the children? What would have happened to us if we never found out the truth? Was our fate going to be the same as them, or much worse? Subscribe to my YouTube channel. Follow my Instagram and Facebook pages for more stories. Links are in the description.